And Bill didn't answer. Bill said, "That's your problem."
And Bill was 15 years after Jackie Robinson.
Right.
So you want to talk about going in the back door, or not having someplace to eat and whites only and everything else. There had been some roads paved, but still the roads were really rocky for Bill Russell et al. In those times as well.
Yeah. Wilt Chamberlain would just flat out say, "This is wrong. I won't stand for it."
Right.
And neither approach was wrong.
Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
Hi, I'm Dr. Philip Nelson, and I'd like to welcome you to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a series of conversations dealing with racial and social injustice issues that we began shortly after the death of George Floyd. This week is an extension of last week's talk on heroes. I hope you enjoy Heroes Part 2.
So, growing up in the 60s and 70s, most of my heroes were sports and politics. JFK, RFK, really Mickey Mantle, center fielder, New York Yankees, everything. My favorite number is 7 because of that. Anytime I could wear a uniform number 7, I would wear uniform number 7. There was very little. Somehow Gandhi, I believe, because reading his biography in high school or junior high, and MLK. I think in many ways I saw MLK as a hero as well, but obviously I couldn't relate to it in the same fashion as you could. And I think we've talked about this in the past, but the difference in approach between Malcolm X and MLK, and I'm trying to think of some of the other, the Black Panthers. That to me was scary stuff, and Martin Luther King was much more, for lack of a better term, palatable as somebody who I could look up to in a Gandhi-like fashion and see efforts to address situations that didn't include violence.
You mentioned that a lot of your heroes were sports heroes, and I think, especially boys, we look to sports a lot for our image maker. And I've made a personal differentiation between mentors and models, and I'm not so sure that I consider sports figures heroes as much as I considered them as models. And they were aspirant mentors for me. But let me ask you a question. Who was the first Black man in baseball?
Jackie Robinson.
Who was the owner? Who did he play for?
Played for the Brooklyn Dodgers, and the owner and general manager, I can visual Branch Rickey.
Branch Rickey.
The general manager, and the owner. I know the name. It just avoids me right now.
Who was the greater hero, Branch Rickey or Jackie Robinson?
Oh, there's an interesting question. Who was the greater hero, Branch Rickey or Jackie Robinson? I think they were both heroes in their own way. I think Branch Rickey as a trailblazer to open up the Major League Baseball to Blacks, sent a message to the rest of the sports world that it was time. On the other hand, the pain, the attacks, the challenges that Jackie Robinson went through makes him a hero for those who have to go through pain and suffering to accomplish a dream. So I would suggest that they are both heroes in their own right.
Okay. You see, I didn't follow baseball as a child.
Right.
And so I actually didn't know about Jackie Robinson until I read the story.
Well, I was not born when Jackie Robinson broke in 1945, so it was a little
Right.
bit before my time.
Exactly. You know,
And by the time I was invested in baseball, which would have been the mid 60s, the Dodgers had already moved to Los Angeles. The Yankees had Elston Howard as their catcher. The Mets were the other team in baseball at that point in time. I read about Jackie Robinson and changes that he was able to create in baseball, but I didn't see the players as black and white. I just saw the players for the skills that they brought to the field.
by the time you got invested
By the time
in
I was
baseball,
invested,
right?
yeah.
The version of the story that I read, and I don't remember which book I read now, but most of it focused on Jackie Robinson. They did a fair job of narrating Branch Rickey's role, but I've always wondered just how hard was it for Branch Rickey when he broke the color line in hiring it? What did he have to go through? How was his family impacted in their social circles? How did it affect his ability to trade players with the other teams? How did it affect his coach's ability to coach new players? I suspect the people that they traded for were people who were willing to play with Jackie. And gradually the team changed from a race permissive perspective. Yeah, I don't mind. I'll play with anybody as long as we win. That's how attitudes change. You know, it's kind of like the Celtics and their great center,
Bill Russell.
Bill Russell. Nobody wanted Bill Russell on the team either. And the fans didn't want Bill Russell until they realized that nobody could knock him down, until they realized that he could actually hold some centers scoreless.
Well, and nobody wanted Wilt Chamberlain because he was outspoken.
Yes,
and Lou Alcindor, eventually Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, he was right at the time that Cassius Clay became Muhammad Ali. I mean, all of these changes that were going on influenced the way people looked at athletes, not because they were great athletes, but because who they were as people.
So you got Bill Russell, Martin Luther King, Wilt Chamberlain, and Malcolm X.
Okay.
Right? They're kind of like pairs.
Okay. Yes.
Right? In terms of balancing the approach
right.
to breaking the color barrier.
1963, Wilt Chamberlain scores 100 points. Nobody's come close.
I know.
And if he were white, he would have been a hero and they would have had everything all over the place for him. He got some press, but I don't think he got the respect because it was Wilt Chamberlain.
It wasn't because he was Wilt Chamberlain. It's because he was rebellious. It was because he repaid the disrespect he received with disrespect.
Yeah, he was opinionated.
Yeah, I mean, but isn't everybody? Bill Russell was opinionated too. The difference is that Wilt Chamberlain told the press his opinion.
Right.
Wilt Chamberlain waited until the ball game was over, everybody was dressed, and then he called his coach and said, "We're not doing this again." He said in an interview recently, the first time they went to North Carolina for some game and he couldn't stay at the hotel that the team was staying in. And there may have been one or two other Black members, but they ended up staying at another hotel. And he told Red Auerbach that night, he said, "Okay, I'll play tonight, but we're not doing this again." He said, "Well, what are you talking about?" He said, "We're not doing this again." He said, "This isn't a team. These are players that are staying in different places, and then we show up on the court to play. That's not a team. A team stays together. And if you want me to be part of a team, then we will do team activities together, including sleeping in the same place, eating in the same restaurant, etc. And Red said, well, I can't control that. What do you want me to do? And Bill didn't answer. Bill said, that's your problem.
And Bill was 15 years after Jackie Robinson.
Right.
So you want to talk about going in the back door or not having someplace to eat and whites only and everything else. There had been some roads paved, but still the roads were really rocky for Bill Russell et al. In those times as well.
Yeah. Will Chamberlain would just flat out say, this is wrong. I won't stand for it.
Right.
And neither approach was wrong. My sports figures are probably not as well known as yours. And then again, they may be because most of them broke the color barrier. You know, if a Black person showed up on TV, we all went around, look who's on TV. That's, being from Mississippi, we didn't have one pro team in any sport. Whereas you had pro teams out here on the coast in every sport. So the teams that I rooted for were the teams that had Black players. When they didn't have a lot of Black players, or if they had a lot of Black players, if two teams got together that had Black players, then I would pick the team that had the most from Jackson State. So when Willie Richardson went to the Colts was my team. And when Johnny Unitas wouldn't throw a pass to Willie Richardson, I would get mad at Johnny Unitas until finally he had to start throwing the ball to Willie because Willie kept catching it and Willie was always open.
Now, who was the great running back that came out of Jackson State?
Walter Payton.
Thank you.
We went to school together.
Now, you mentioned to me, and I think it's on another conversation about Arthur Ashe.
Yeah. Arthur Ashe came to Jackson State and did a summer camp.
Right.
And I played tennis. He thought that I might have some talent. He was willing to take me back to his camp in Virginia and train me. But my dad was like, no, this boy's kind of smart. He's going to be a scientist. Too many people want to excel in sports, and there's no certainty that he's going to be as good as you, And Arthur was like, yeah, but you don't know until we nurture him. And he said, well, I don't give any false hope. He's going to be a doctor. I know it. He's going to be a veterinarian. I was devastated. I can't go for a summer, and it was going to be all expense paid. But he was more afraid that I was going to get sidelined. He knew that only 1% of the football players on the Jackson State team got into the pros, and only 1% of them survived getting into the pros. And so those numbers just didn't add up for him. But it was always about my chances of getting into the pros and being better. And I remember when my second or third year in vet school, I was driving home from Tuskegee to Jackson, and I drove through Birmingham. I picked up a paper, and they were opening a new tennis center in Birmingham. And they had just selected the director of that tennis center. And the director of that tennis center was, the last name was Chadwick. And I remember saying, I'm like, oh my God. And I played against him in the state championship when I was a senior in high school. And then I realized they had just hired him as the director, and they were paying him $100,000 to be a director of a tennis camp. And I was 2 years away from graduating in vet school. I was waiting for a $15,000 job as a veterinarian when I went back to Jackson, Mississippi. And I remember thinking to myself that I should tell Daddy I should have been a tennis player because I was playing on the level of Chadwick. Nobody knew him. He never got to the pros. He didn't get into pros either. But that's when I learned that there's a strata of performance in every profession. I learned that day you can get your knuckles wrapped so many times that you stop reaching. It's kind of like the social experiment probably have heard about, where they have this open pen of gorillas. They could be chimpanzees, and they hang a bunch of bananas in the center, and then they watch. And every time a chimpanzee tries to get a banana, they turn on the water hose and hose them down to get them away from the banana. And every day they come in and put a fresh bunch of bananas in. And after about a week, they've habituated the chimpanzees not to reach for those bananas. They can have bananas that are given to them by the attendants, but they can't have those bananas. And after a while, the bananas are safe. After a week or so, they can put new bananas up there and they can rot, but they won't be touched. Then they introduce a new chimpanzee. And this new chimpanzee doesn't know the rules. And he reaches for the banana and the other chimpanzees beat him down. And they teach him that you can't touch those bananas. They haven't seen a water hose in a month, but they perpetuate that training. Those are the chronic consequences of segregation and discrimination.
Yes, it both directly and indirectly tells you what you can't do.
And then you end up enforcing rules that are not in your favor.
Right.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.